that this was an aberration in history, and that the vitality of the Anglo-Saxon race and some of the other European races was limited and would burn itself out in cosmopolitanism and so on, and declining birth rates, and the yellow races and other races would rise, and they would become peers on the international stage and take their countries back from colonial domination. He was obviously quite prescient with that, because that's literally how the 20th century played out. And he feared forces of miscegenation would be existential for the
Mm.
white race, and that therefore a explicit politics of racial preservation and explicit white nationalism was necessary, because he had that, as you mentioned, this view that the white man really only belonged in the temperate zones, and that living in northern Queensland would be a problem. He didn't predict that we could adapt to those environments, which obviously kind of seems silly now to a certain extent. But nevertheless, the view was, well, in Australia and in North America, we have these temperate zones where the white man can set up states that have the explicit goal of racial self-preservation to secure a future for our people and way of life, despite changing global conditions. That's important to recognize as well, that the White Australia policy wasn't just based in some kind of contemptuous hatred for other races, but it was based in an existential requirement, a struggle from the very beginning, whether you're talking about the early Australian labour movement or talking about nationalist intellectuals and political figures and so on. They were big picture people, and they obviously were very happy with white culture and the white way of life and wanted to preserve it. But they didn't necessarily have this seething hatred or even this will to dominate other races, but actually they wanted separation for the preservation of our way of life down the generations. And so this is actually
Mm.
the opposite of a supremacist worldview. It's a separatist worldview, and it's a worldview that actually gave respect to these foreign races by saying, well, we don't actually anticipate our capacity to dominate you is going to be successful or even desirable. Instead, we recognize that we can't dominate the world entirely, and that we need ethno states or racial states in certain pockets of the world. So, with all of that